Honorable Committee. So my name is Maria Weingarten. I'm a member of New Canaan's Board of Finance, and I'm a realtor in Fairfield County. I'm here to submit my own personal testimony not on behalf of any other entity, and I'm testifying in strong opposition to HB 6107, HB 6611, SB 1027, SB 1024, and HB 6613. One thing I've heard that's been, it seems to be a talking point, is this thought that people have a fear of change, or that there's fear. It's not really fear. It's a legitimate concern by reasonable people that are reading facts in the bills that have not been disclosed well in advance to the public and to the fellow legislators in the light of day. They have not been given to the press. No, the press is not reporting on the contents of it, and I find that highly frustrating. So here's a couple of things that I've just overarching things. I can't support the removal of public hearings. I think that's a problem. I don't support as of right multifamily market value development for the very reasons that Ms. Dobbins spoke about, because it will not create anything middle housing or affordable. And all it does is it puts our towns at risk. And in terms of having to face really high infrastructure costs. And those costs are most of those towns, a lot of towns in Fairfield County, they don't get any money from the state. So while it might be very easy for a city or somewhere else to build another school or do whatever else, or, a new fire station or whatever, we don't get any funding. So not only do we have to overcome all that, we have to think about every single thing that might impact our towns that a lot of other people don't have to, other towns don't have to consider. The affordability part only comes in after 10% when you have 10 or more units, and the builders won't be motivated to develop anything above 9 units. They'll just keep doing that all day. I do not support the elimination of parking. There's so many streets in these towns that are not wide enough. And it creates more of a hazard and a danger to pedestrians. There won't be able to it'll be a danger to bikers. There's a lot of issues. And the comment that Sarah Bronin made, it's a free option. It's free. It's to do all this development is great, and it raises revenue. Sure, it's a free option to the state. It is not a free option to these towns, in particular the towns that do not get any ECS funding or any other types of funding. And that's something that really needs to be considered, because once you start raising the taxes and we start to equalize with Westchester, people will not move to Fairfield County, and you're going to lose people to other places. Okay. So okay, we'll go on then. So then specifically on the bills, SB 6107, I wonder about the committees that are appointed, and I would want to make sure that there is good representation from people in smaller communities and rural communities and suburbs, not just the cities. 6611, let's talk about the unfair fair share, which really it doesn't recognize that there's naturally existing market rate affordable housing. So it's not an honest discussion. There are other bills have ADUs that will lead us further away from market fair share of meeting any of our standards and goals. There's, aggrieved parties can sue the towns, which will raise our costs again. And it's going to force municipalities to secure funding for expansion of infrastructure. And these are step ups. These are not gradual straight line based on development. You hit a threshold and you have to overcome that and pay that through significant bonding, which again, we are not supported by the state. And then HB 6613, I don't support the as of right accessory, middle housing, accessory apartments. That has to be decided locally. It's not a problem to have accessory or ADUs, but let the local communities decide what makes the most sense for them. And only one parking space or fee in lieu for parking is another bad idea. The Easter egg in SB 1027, that's the one where you're limiting moratorium rights, which if you've gone so far to get a moratorium right now, you're going to limit them. I, anyway, SB 124, 1024, there's at least 11 things that are wrong with that bill. And it has to do with the vehicle miles. It's not a standard that's typically used. Reduced parking or totally eliminated parking. And I think, the part where Sarah Brown is.
Forgive me. It's your time. So if you could wrap up your time, that would be great. Just
Sure.
with another sentence or two, and then we'll go to Rep Zulo.
Okay, so the first thing I'll say is this is the last point, is all of this is focused on the supply side. And you're thinking you just need to create more housing and everything's going to be wonderful. And that's not the case. Until you create the demand side, where you create good jobs, where you bring back the economy, nothing's going to get better in this state, and we're not going to turn it around. And especially now during COVID, to make such great drastic changes is highly unadvisable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weingarten. Representative Zulo, to be followed by Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, and thank you for your testimony. Just wanted to follow up on three points you made, one of which I don't think you had enough time to get to, but which I don't believe we heard a lot about tonight. I'll get to that in a minute. First, it sounds like one of your bigger concerns is the erosion of your town's ability to compete with other towns, and particularly others in New York, people coming from Westchester. Is that your professional opinion as a realtor speaking?
Well, I think at some point, I hear it every day. When my clients come and ask me, how are the taxes in Connecticut versus New York, and they're looking at our property taxes, and they're saying, and they're comparing town to town as well. So, I think it's a very dangerous game to be playing, to think that just because people are coming out of New York City, that they're willing to pay more coming into Connecticut, and that sure, we can just jack up the rates. And this is, this is an extraordinary event to have. The badness of what's happening in the city, with a lot of, people are looking for safety. They are. And so they're coming out of the city. They want to have some, between COVID and everything else that's going on, they wanted space. They wanted to get out of the city. And I see that every day, is people are looking for properties that have a little bit of a lawn, a little bit of, and this is not sustainable if we don't change our ways. So we have a good opportunity here, and we don't want to waste it by putting us, over the edge, overbuilding something that's not the real demand that we're going to have. And I also have a lot of questions on transportation and whether that's going to come back, depending on whether people have to commute into or not, given the fact that a lot of people have worked from home. And it's not as big of an issue now. And we know that people can be productive working from home, as we are at 3 a.m. in the morning.
I'm going to skip over item 2 in the interest of time, because I think I'll get to it with other people as well. I just want to draw your attention back to that issue of vehicle miles traveled, vehicle trips, instead of level of service calculations. You had alluded to it, and then I think you just didn't have enough time to finish it. Did you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I'd like to understand a little bit more of that, because, I think about so many different towns do things differently. And depending on where you are in the state, it might be more relevant to you or not. If you're in a town like New Canaan and you have to travel to work in Westchester, you might be traveling a great deal of miles, or you might be a commuter town if you're right on the trainway. And maybe I don't understand enough about what that specific legislation line is, but it seems to me if we have a standard that already existed, to change it now, I'm not sure it makes sense.
In my short experience, level of service calculations, have to do with obviously the width of road and existence of shoulders. So essentially they calculate whether or not these roads have the ability to, what's the amount of service that a road can handle. And I'm going to defer to others who I believe may be testifying regarding, traffic experts who may be weighing in more on this, but that's my experience with that. And I think that's where where the proposal is going.
But the parking in particular, just eliminating the parking. And I think I left out the one part where it removes the provide adequate light and air. And I wonder whether that's about loom, and whether that's about, just height restrictions. Is that sort of removing height restrictions? I think if there's a little, there's, is that just an elegant way of saying we're going to allow taller buildings, because I have heard Sarah Bronin say things like, well, if you have a 2-story, why not have it be a 4-story and then have apartments above it. And then you have on-street parking because it's right in your downtown Main Street. So why not, and when you already have just enough parking for what you have right now, that everybody has, a 1-bedroom usually will have 2, sometimes 1, but mostly 2 people. And then they probably have 2 cars. So, I think it's concerning to allow fee in lieu of parking, or to remove parking entirely. I wouldn't need 3 cars. And I think that's another thing, is an exaggeration. 3 spots for a studio apartment. I find that hard to believe that that's pretty common. Did we take the most extreme example, or, because I think reality is most places wouldn't have that.
I could further editorialize, but I will not. I appreciate the time. And thank you for your testimony, and thank you for sticking with us.
Thank you.
Representative Zullo, your timing is absolutely incredible. You're really good. You had 17 seconds left.
When you present in court, you get used to timing things at the moment.
Exactly. There you go. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Representative Winkler.
Yes, thank you for your testimony. So I have a building lot in your town. It's vacant. I want to build a house on it. The house meets all zoning requirements. Do I have to tell anybody I'm building the house? Other than, say, a building inspector to inspect it every once in a while? Is there any public hearing about me building the house?
It depends on what you're building, doesn't it?
No, if I'm building a house, I said.
Just a house.
Just a house.
Okay, if you're in the right zone, because there's a zone
Right.
for everything. Yeah.
I'm in the right zone, everything's fine.
Mhm.
So I don't need a public hearing, right?
Yes, I know where you're going
Okay.
with this. Go ahead.
So what we are asking in 1024 is that people establish a procedure, that the town itself would establish the procedure. And the procedure would be such that it would be like building a house on a approved lot. It would just, the people would follow the procedure, and they wouldn't need a public hearing because the town had already established a procedure, just like they did for single family homes. Are you objecting to that?
Have you removed parking? Are you gonna
We'll get to
max
parking
out
in a
your
second.
coverage? Are you gonna?
Pretend the town wrote the policy exactly the way it wanted. Would you be opposed to people being able to take advantage of the new town policy the way they took advantage of the fact they get to build a single family home without an additional hearing, because through hearings, you'd already established a procedure?
I think what you're not appreciating is that when you're adding 4 units, at 4+ is what we're talking about. So for Sarah to say that it was only duplexes and quads, I mean, I read through the bill again. It said 4 units plus, and it said a minimum of 15 on an acre. So we're not talking about just a little, we're talking about significant density. Okay.
Okay, between you and I, we limited it to 4. We said there had to be at least a mile between every 4. Would you still object?
Again, I don't think that every property is different. And I think you have to look at runoff. You have to look at all those other things. When you have a single family, it's very different. And do you have a septic? Do you not? Like every property is different. And there's this impression that everyone is being forestalled from doing development, and they're not. Our planning and zoning chair, who's on the list, I think he's unfortunately right near the bottom, basically said that over 95% of anything that comes to them gets approved. 95%. That's a pretty high hit rate. So, and we have plenty of all types of housing in our town. So to try to force, and it is force, so let's be clear, to try to force housing, overdevelopment when your towns may not be able to handle the capacity for spill over onto the roads, all those other issues. It is a different animal. It is.
We force all the time. You can't expand a non-conforming use. Anyway, going to
I would say it's a
parking.
non-conforming use. You're trying to make it a conforming use, right? So we can disagree. It's a special permit. Yeah.
Clever, but parking. Okay, so you need parking. The thinking is old. Instacart, Peapod, Uber, Lyft. In 5 years, all the Uber and Lyft drivers will be out of work. You will call a car. It will drive itself to your house, pick you up and take you anywhere you want to go, drop you off, pick up the next person, and so on and so on. It'll even carpool through computers. You won't need a car in 5 years. If you don't want a car, you don't need a car now with Uber and Lyft and with Peapod and Instacart. And
yeah, if money is
So-
no object, you don't need a car. Those uses are
you
pretty
find
expensive.
Uber and Lyft more expensive than owning a car?
I'm thinking about the person who buys the on the lower end of the income bracket. I'm not thinking that
Well,
they
believe
have
me-
an expensive car.
believe me, it's cheaper to dry your clothes at the laundromat, and it's cheaper to use Uber and Lyft than it is to drive a car.
And
But leaving that aside, what about Instacart and Peapod? Everybody says, oh, you got to drive to the grocery store. Well, what if you don't? I mean, there are lots of
yeah,
places
if you
that will
like to pay
deliver
more
food.
money, again, I mean, anybody who thinks about these things, it costs more money. I can go shopping in New Canaan to a very expensive store, or I can go to Norwalk and it's much cheaper. So people make economic decisions all the time as to where they shop. And I don't have public transportation that would get me there. I would need a bigger car. I would need, I'm just going to get, yes.
I'm going to ask you to conclude.
No, you don't need. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. There is something called microtransit. It's VIA. It exists in places in Connecticut. It's being piloted. So the carpooling type thing that you're talking about is actually something that we have here in our own state. Ms. Weingarten, I have a few questions for you. And comments. One, in terms of 6107 and concerns about the committee appointed, that's a bill that's been passed twice out of this committee, and cost and CCM both have been included in the conversations. One of my questions for you is it your opinion that when building occurs in a town, that towns lose money?
No, not in general, but when it's exponential growth, because we're not talking about just growth as you're able to manage it. We're talking about exponential.
So you're talking about any multifamily or density development would be a money losing prospect for a town?
It depends, right? I mean, here's the thing. I haven't even mentioned this part, but we're able to impose conditions on approval. That's going to be gone. We used to collect funds from development fees and use that to develop affordable housing. That's going to be gone. So we won't be able to do any of those things. So yes, we have 100 units just developed of apartments.
Forgive me for interrupting. I have a couple other questions. I don't think that the bill contemplates losing the ability to collect some of those fees, but I do want to touch base on 6611.
It does say return the extra though.
Okay, 6611. When you said that was not an honest discussion about fair share, you said that's the unfair fair share. It's not an honest discussion. Can you tell me again
Sure.
what that means?
Because there's naturally existing affordable housing in so many towns, and then we have never quantified, as you've said, in over these many hours, it hasn't been quantified. So we don't even. There are plenty of units that I rent that are very low rate.
Would you stipulate that there is a tremendous need for affordable housing in our state? Would you agree that that's true?
There is a need for affordable housing, but would you also stipulate that it is expensive to build in a town where the land cost is very high, or where you have a lot of restrictions? If it costs over $400,000 to produce one unit in New Canaan,
So I
That's not,
think you answered my question, is that
Okay.
there is a tremendous need. And I think that if you've heard the discussion today, you've heard me say over and over that we do want to work together to come up with solutions. I want to specifically address your concerns about transparency and the way that these bills have been put before the committee so that you clearly understand and explicitly understand how the process has worked. And that is that this committee voted to raise titles and concepts, and we chose to fully draft the bills in legislative language so that those bills would be fully before the public and the committee for hearing, as opposed to, which is fully proper. There's another way we could do it. And again, it's fully proper, and many committees do this, and we have in the past, put proposed bills, which would mean that just some language would be before the committee, you would come to testify, and then afterwards, after the public hearing, we would vote to draft. That's why this committee, again, fully drafted language so that everyone could see what these concepts were in full. They were 5 days, were required by our rules to notice those 5 days before the hearing, available on the bulletin. I will admit that the General Assembly's website could use some updating, just like the statute needs to be reorganized to make it a little bit more user-friendly. But I just want you to know that that is our process and that we have.
and I do acknowledge that.
Let me finish, please.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons why we did that this year, is because of the fact that we're in a pandemic and we're in COVID world, Zoom world, so that folks could be able to have access to that. I will also add that, and as I have said to our committee all the way through, once these bills go through a public hearing, we will continue to negotiate with so many of the stakeholders who are here today and have lots of conversations amongst the leadership of the committee before we vote anything out of committee, which will be a public voting process. So I wanted to just make sure you were aware of that. I'll let you say one brief word and then we need to conclude because our time is up.
And I do want to acknowledge that, yes, I am very grateful that you actually did have the entire language as opposed to SB 804 in the other committee in housing, which definitely was feels like a bait and switch. That's
a proper process. I want to be clear that that is, part of the process, because you know what? It's the idea of gathering input from people before we draft the bills. But Ms. Weingarten, our time is up as well.
Can I just add one more point? I think the bill for 1024 was available in January by CCM, and they just didn't make it available until right before when you guys dropped it on 5 days in advance.
Yeah, the bill, that's because the language was being worked on all the way up till the end. And I can probably tell you that if we pass zoning legislation this year, I can almost bet that it will be voted on late in the session, because there will be conversations that will be happening all the way up until the end. And you can appreciate, after having been here for all these hours, that's because there are so many different voices involved in this, and you try and get the best possible bill that you can, knowing that nothing is ever perfect in legislation.